Does anybody have any questions? In addition to questions, if there's anything that you've learned or read recently that you think is interesting, you can share that and we can talk about it. Yes?
I asked you this the other day. I know that Satan is not equal to God. Is Satan capable of creating anything?
Is Satan capable of creating anything? That's a good question. And what was that?
Havoc.
Havoc, that's right. Dan said havoc. So, in that sense, the answer is yes, he can. The foundation of the question is one that's important, and I think it bears restating, in that Satan is not equal to God. Sometimes people view Satan as the anti-God. Like there's a good God in heaven and there's a bad God in hell, and they fight with each other, and thankfully at the end the good God will win, though barely. Sometimes there's that kind of view, like two fairly equal nations going to conflict. Hopefully you chose the right one. That's not how it is with God and Satan. God is all of the things we've been talking about. He is eternal, has no beginning, no end, immutable, he is infinite, he is all-powerful, all-wise, all-knowing, all-present. He is all of these things, and Satan is not. Satan is a finite, limited, created being. He is very powerful, but he is nowhere near the same level as God. And so when we think of Satan and God fighting, it would be like a professional wrestler fighting a toddler. Right? Not even that. We're giving too much credit to the toddler. But that's kind of the picture. Floyd Mayweather boxing Gregory. Greg's quick, but I think Mayweather would probably come out on top in that matchup. So that's kind of the dynamic there between Satan and God. But the question then is, can he create anything? Well, we're told in the Bible that he is capable of producing false wonders, false signs. And I don't know that it means necessarily that the wonder or sign itself is false, but that like the true wonders are used to validate the truth, there are false wonders used to validate things that are not false. Satan apparently turned the Pharaoh's magicians, their staves, into serpents. It seems like they had that power, and they were able to do it. Because when Moses came, or when Aaron's rod was tossed down and it turned into a snake, they were like, that's not a big deal. So it seems like they've been able to do this stuff before. When the water gets turned into blood, again, the magicians are like, not hard. Now, is that creating something? Not in the same way that God did, creating something out of nothing. But it is changing things, modifying things. And so it may be that Satan, being a created being, is very similar to us. We can modify all sorts of things, but we can't make stuff out of nothing. And so it may be, I'm not aware off the top of my head of a time where Satan created something out of nothing. Does anybody know of an instance?
God is addressed as a creator and almost in a way of being exclusive creator.
Yeah.
And so I think that would go with what you're saying. Satan, or none of us create anything out of nothing.
Right.
Like God did it. And that's a title that's reserved, seems to be reserved for God. It doesn't say he's the only creator, but it implies that.
Yeah. And when you think of Satan himself being a created being, it would seem like he has, just kind of rationally, that he sort of has the same limitations as other created beings. He is bound by the creation. And so he's limited in that way. Jessica, did you have a comment?
I just had a question about Satan being able to read our thoughts or read our minds, because I was ignorant discussing that this week, with how we pray, how we reason things out, and so that he can. That's private. That's between God and us. I don't think that he has that ability, just like he doesn't have the ability to create. I can't think of any time when he was able to read the minds. He can see our outward actions, this things we do in secret. That's what I shared with her.
Yeah, because he's a spiritual being. And so he lives in the spiritual realm, kind of like we talked about before, which gives him access, sort of, to the lesser realms. the physical realms. But again, I don't know of a place, like you're saying, where it says in Satan knowing the heart, the intentions of their heart, or Satan knowing the thoughts of men. But he is certainly an expert in human psychology. He knows that the same tricks that worked on Eve are still going to work on us today. And the same tricks that worked on Adam are going to work on us today. So he doesn't have to be too inventive.
Observant, all he has.
Yeah.
He only has to be observant, and he watches us, what we do. And so that's how he knows what our weaknesses are. And so he'll come at you with your weakness. He won't come at you with your strength. But he's observant. He knows what you're thinking because of your action.
Yeah. Dan said that he's observant and he watches us, and he knows our strengths and our weaknesses because he watches us. It's like we're our own worst enemy sometimes. We give him exactly what he needs to attack us, and then he's going to come at us where we're weak. Julian and saying.
I was looking at like that Jurassic Park, I don't know if you ever saw Jurassic Park, but it's where the raptor tries to hit that one fence and trying to get that one weakness where he can get out and tries again and again and again.
Yeah.
I think that's how he is. He tries that one area. No, that doesn't work. That doesn't work.
Yeah. And you'll see that even today, like, a very physical parallel is in warfare, you send out scouts. And sometimes you recon in force. And you do feinting maneuvers. You come and you'll attack and then you'll back up. And a casual observer, unfamiliar with the way that military tactics would work, would say, well, that was really dumb to attack them repeatedly. And they're not attacking them repeatedly. They're looking for weakness, which is why you recon in force. Because if your force recon goes forward and there's a weakness, there's a point where they begin to put pressure and the enemy doesn't put pressure back, that's where you attack. And so you're exactly right. That picture of that velociraptor going through and testing the electric fence, looking for weakness, Satan does that too.
If Satan knew the intentions or your thoughts, when God said, if you consider Job, Satan would have gone, yeah, I have, and let's talk about someone else.
That's right.
Let's not talk about Job. Or the things that Satan does that he thinks are great victories. If he knew the hearts of men, then, he would have said, oh yeah, let's not, crucify Jesus. Yeah, he's going to win in the end. Let's not do this, let's not do that. And so while he seems all powerful compared to us, and he is much more powerful than us, when you look at the grand arc of human events, he's quite stupid.
Yeah. Because he's only working with the knowledge that he knows. And we do this as people. We need to be aware that we do this. There's a phrase that has been made popular, and it's going around in the news and the media. It's called confirmation bias. And basically what it means is once you have established your point of view, once you have decided what you believe about something, all information is either silly or confirms what you believe. And so if Satan does that too, it would seem. Because if he didn't do that, by now he would have figured out this is not good. But for some reason, he doesn't. And I can't tell you what his reasoning is because, unfortunately, I cannot read minds either. Or fortunately, depending on how you look at that. And so we are limited, and he is limited in very similar ways. Yes?
What about mental illness, like to the extent of Vegas shooter?
Mm-hmm.
Satan make him that way?
Sometimes, and that's going to be the big limiting factor here. Sometimes mental illness happens because we do it to ourselves. Many, many times people suffer because of their own choices. Sometimes our things happen in our life and we look and we ask that question, why did this happen to me? And the answer is staring at you in the mirror. Sin, the human brain actually is not built very well to deal with sin. Sin hurts us much more deeply than we might try to tell ourselves it does. Our brain doesn't like it when things don't match. And it will force things to match. Just an example of how much your brain likes things to make sense. If you were alive when President Kennedy was assassinated and you heard the news of President Kennedy's assassination, you can probably remember where you were, what you were doing, what time of day it was when you heard, and you can remember if you had just eaten, you can remember exactly what you ate, who served you, how much it cost. There's all these details that your brain thinks it remembers. These are called flashbulb memories. And what happens is as you go forward in life, how important really is an outfit that you were wearing? Most of the time. Not very. Right? So your brain doesn't spend a lot of time memorizing what you're wearing. It really doesn't spend a lot of time memorizing what you've eaten. Kevin, what did you eat last week on Tuesday? I don't know. But now suppose the Hindenburg blew up last week on Tuesday, and you asked Kevin, what did you eat last week on Tuesday? He would tell you, well, at 11:35 a.m., I ate a ham and cheese sandwich with a side of sauerkraut and a baked potato, and it was about that time that I heard that the Hindenburg had exploded. And what your brain does is these significant events, your brain says, oh, that was important. I have to know everything about this important event because it forms who I am. So I have to remember what I was wearing and what I ate, who I was with and what time and this and that and the other. And they actually have photos of people on the day that President Kennedy was assassinated, and they ask them, where were you and what were you doing when President Kennedy was assassinated? They get the day right, but everything else is wrong. They have the wrong outfits, they have the wrong people they're with, they have the wrong stuff that they... And it's not that they're lying, it's that their brain doesn't like it when things don't match up. And a very important event we have to know everything about. And so your brain fills in the gaps. And it does it without you knowing. These people aren't lying. When they say at 11:35 I had a ham and cheese sandwich with a side of sauerkraut, well actually Kevin ate a steak and asparagus. But he's not lying when he tells you about the sandwich. His brain makes that up and says, this is what you did. And so when it comes to things like mental illness, sometimes, people fall off into the darkness because our brain doesn't deal well with sin. And we do something and we say, well, I'm not a bad person, why did I do this sin? Now you do another thing and you say, well, I'm not a bad person, why did I do this thing that is bad? Until eventually, sometimes the only way that your brain can reconcile this is by saying, I must be a really bad person. And that begins, sometimes, the descent into that. There are many books that religious researchers have done linking sin to mental illness. That is not to say that every difficulty that people face is because of sin. Sometimes things don't work the way they should. And we have to be careful that we don't make somebody feel less human or make somebody feel like there's something in particularly wrong with them if the physical difficulties that they struggle with happen to be chemical in nature. And maybe there are some chemical imbalances in their brain. And now, thankfully, we can help that. But we also have to be careful, if we're that person, that we don't try and use medicine to fix what God could. And so it's kind of one of those things where, is mental illness always caused by sin? No, I don't think so. But sometimes it is. And I'm not even going to guess at a percentage of which is which. It's just not my field of expertise. Yeah.
Mental illness can also be caused, in my opinion, sometimes by sin that is done to the person.
Mm-hmm.
Not always is it when they're committing a sin, but horrific things happen to people, and especially when they can't deal with that in a godly way, then their brain doesn't have a place to put that in it, and it breaks them. And it's still God has the answer to that, but there are times when that happens.
Yeah. And a very popular or widely known instance of that is post-traumatic stress disorder in soldiers and veterans returning from combat. I think I've had people who wanted to kill me before, but I've never had people chasing me, actively trying to kill me 24 hours a day, who were armed with automatic weapons. That's a very stressful situation. And that is something that somebody else is doing that can affect you. And there are other more personal things. The one saving grace, if you can call it that, about military combat is it's relatively impersonal. There are other more personal things that can be done to people where an innocent person in this circumstance is affected negatively. And we have to be aware of that too. Did that answer the question?
But God is graceful. And if there is an actual illness that is not self-imposed, God's going to do what is right, just, fair, and merciful, all rolled into one. And sometimes we just have to trust Him in His great knowledge, in His great love, and His great understanding, that He's going to make it right. And thankfully, we don't have to make that choice. And so if someone, no fault of their own, has a mental illness, God's going to do what's right. And that's the good thing about having such a great God that we worship. Is we can trust Him to do it. And if one day He ever decides to explain Himself to us, I'm 100% confident we're going to go, wow, that's exactly what should have happened. And we've got to take comfort in that, because there's so many things we just don't know, we don't understand, and with our limited knowledge, but God's perfectly just and perfectly merciful, all rolled into one, and He loves us. And that's going to be, it's always going to be great, whatever He does.
We have to be careful that we don't pass judgment. Like, for example, historically speaking, if somebody committed suicide and you went and asked a religious person, where are they going to be? What would be the answer? Hell. They're going to hell. If they committed murder and they were unrepentant, they're going to hell. Well, first of all, I cannot tell you with confidence where anybody is going to be until God says. Now, if God calls me up and lets me know, then I can tell you for certainty where someone will be. But like Zane was saying, God is gracious and God is merciful, and God knows exactly what this person was dealing with, and God can make that judgment. And it will be the right one. And what we do when we step in and try to take God's place is something like that affects more than just the person who committed the act. It affects their whole family. And it's very traumatic, and there will be people who are hurt by it, and people who, again, are going to suffer mentally from it through nothing that they've done. And what we do when we kind of cut that off is now we make their life more difficult. And we make it much more likely that they will do something similar instead of being gracious and helpful to them. And so we have to be very careful about passing judgment. Carrie?
God has let him, he made himself known to me through his creation, his power. And he overcomes Satan at that time. And he overpowers everything else that he creates. Also, at the time of Jesus, he lets man know he's stronger still. And then at the end of this book, he lets us know that we need to trust him, which is what we're talking regardless.
Yeah, Gary was talking about how in the beginning, when God created everything, it shows his strength, and then he will subdue Satan throughout the book. And in fact, I think at the cross, you see the weakest that God will ever be, being limited in a human form. His weakness is stronger than Satan's greatest strength. And in the end, again, you see the glory and majesty and the strength of God. And so Gary was saying, trust the strong one. Trust God, who is able to do all those things. Isala?
I'm not sure when this is going to take place, and you probably won't be either, sure. But towards the end times, when the Bible speaks, one will be left in the field and one taken, or one is sitting eating and another one taken. What does that represent?
It depends. When you ask that question, I think you're over in Matthew 23. The answer that you get depends on what you think Jesus is talking about. Matthew 24, 23 and 24. The overriding verse is going to be this in verse 36, where Jesus says, concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven or the Son, but the Father only. For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, and until the day when Noah entered the ark, and they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So it will be with the Son of Man. 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and one left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and one left. Therefore stay awake. You do not know what day your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have left his house to be broken into. Therefore you must also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. And then Jesus will go on to talk about, he continues talking in this vein. There's parables that come after in chapter 25. And so the question we have to ask is, what do we think Jesus is talking about when he says the coming of the Son of Man? And based on the reading that I've done, there's pretty much 2 answers. And they may both be right. In fact, I think they are both right. There's one, more immediate, I think, that Jesus is talking about the end of the physical nation of Israel. And God has been working through this physical people, and there will be a point in time when God cuts off physical Israel. And now there's only spiritual Israel. It doesn't mean that Hebrew people can't be saved, but it means the temple service and all of those things are done. You can see, and it's kind of odd, and it causes some people a lot of problems, if we think that right after the resurrection of Jesus from the dead, everything in the Old Covenant is completely done away, it's no longer acceptable, it's anathema to God, and now there's all these new things. If we think that's how it works, then lots of things don't make sense. Like the apostles going and praying at the temple. That wouldn't really make sense. Why would they go and do that if that's all done away? There wouldn't be much difference between going and doing it at some other shrine that was set up in a false way. Too much difference. There's some difference, don't get me wrong. The other thing that would cause problems is Paul going and offering sacrifices. You know, he actually enters into a vow according to the law. So what we're seeing is God, I think, God is saying there is a time coming when all of the physical things will be done away completely. And there will still be Hebrews and there will still be Gentiles, but all the vestiges, all the temple, all its ordinances, all of those physical things are completely finished. And now there's no more confusion, or this question, do Gentiles have to become Jews? Can Jews act like Gentiles? That question will be done away with, because there's no more physical priesthood, there's no more physical temple, there's no more physical sacrifices. And I think that is one of the comings of the Son of Man, when he comes and he finishes that. There's another time where he comes, because we believe, I believe, that Jesus is seated at the right hand of God, and one day he will come back. And you can kind of see that in places like 1 Thessalonians 4, where we will go and we will meet him, and then we will be with him eternally. He's coming again then, too. And in both instances, these words ring true. Now the question, which is Jesus specifically referring to? The picture isn't literally that there will be 2 people in a field and poof, one will be gone. And now, Fred's left, but Ralph disappeared. That didn't happen when God finished with physical Israel. And on the last day, when everybody is brought before the judgment seat of Christ, it's not going to happen then either. The reason why there's confusion is because in the late 1800s and early 1900s, there's this new idea called the rapture that got started. New ideas, like 99.999 with a little bar over the top, percent of they're wrong. New ideas in Christianity are bad, almost always, because we have a historic faith. Right? We go back and we say, Jesus said this. That's why I believe it. So in 1890, I don't know what year it was when the Schofield Reference Bible was done, but that was kind of the big push for the rapture. Let's just pick 1890. So I have Jesus talking, and I have some guy from 1890 talking, and his ideas are very different from the Bible. I'm going to take Jesus and Paul and Peter and John. The Bible has no reference to this rapture in direct language, where people are taken away and the people who are left get an extra shot to get it right. Everything in the Bible is you die, and then there's judgment. Not there's a judgment, and in case you didn't do well the first time, there's a retest later. That's not the biblical picture. And so this idea, I think, of somebody actually being left in a field, try not to think of it as physical stuff. Yes?
I was just going to say, I've always looked at it as kind of like a picture of
Yeah.
like God gathering up his saints and collecting those who have a portion of his spirit. Because he says when we are baptized and receive a portion of his spirit, we're sealed with his spirit, and he will come back and reclaim that which is his. And so those who are in his kingdom or have his spirit, he will come back and reclaim those at the end of time and take him with him to heaven. So I kind of just look at that way, and then the others will be unfortunately like chaff, and will be burned.
Yeah. And when you think about it, if you knew that Jesus was coming, would you even go out into the field to work? No. Right? And that's kind of the other part of the picture, is that the main emphasis here, because Jesus just said, nobody knows when this is happening. And so the whole idea is emphasizing that there will be some people who were ready and there will be some people who weren't, and neither the ready nor the unready know when this is happening. Because if I knew that Jesus was coming this afternoon or on Wednesday, and I had to be at work at 8 o'clock on Monday, I'm not going. There's no point, because I need to make sure that I've got everything in line. Jesus is showing up Wednesday at 10:30. I don't have time to go to work. Yes?
He said not even the angels in heaven know.
Right. So this isn't, there's nobody except the Father. And that's the point. And sometimes with Jesus, if you go past his point, you wind up making all kinds of mistakes. And so we have to be careful that we don't go past the point Jesus is making. Does that make sense? Yes.
And that's especially true when we remember that the Bible was really transmitted orally. I mean, it was written down, but everybody didn't have a Bible. Most people heard it. It was read to them. But what we do is, since we have the written words, what's so common, we'll go and we'll try to take every detail, and this word and this word, and we'll look at them, and sometimes we need to remember that if someone were hearing this, Jesus was speaking it to them, they wouldn't dissect it. They would go, I understand what he's trying to tell me. Good, I got the point. Maybe there's a sub-point, and I'm good. And sometimes we try to dissect too much.
And that's actually one of the struggles of preaching. When you look throughout history and you think of very famous preachers, if somebody were to ask you a question throughout history, famous preachers, first of all, there shouldn't be. But if there were, what was a name? What was a name that you know of somebody who would be a famous historical preacher? Billy Graham. Okay, one more.
Billy Holiday.
Who?
Billy Holiday.
Billy Holiday, Billy Sunday. Apparently I have the wrong name. Charles Spurgeon, Martin Luther, Augustine, John Chrysostom. He was so famous, he had a silver tongue, right? So there's all these different names. When people talk about Charles Spurgeon, people don't remember Charles Spurgeon's fine exegesis of Deuteronomy 17. Right? They don't remember that. They don't remember all the detailed work and all the things that he did. What they remember is Charles Spurgeon standing up in the pulpit of the London Metropolitan Tabernacle, delivering these fiery images that stuck in people's brains. The things that people remember about Martin Luther are not his detailed exegesis of the book of Romans, which is largely wrong. But they don't remember that. What they remember is Martin Luther standing by the pulpit and calling the Pope a fat braying mule. Right? That's what they remember, because it's that picture, though he actually said that. There's a reason why the Pope really didn't like Martin Luther. Right? We don't remember unless you have written down all the things that Augustine said. But what we remember are his picture of the pears, where Augustine as a young boy climbed up in a pear tree and pulled the pears out of this man's tree just for the joy of stealing. That's what we remember. We remember the pictures. And Jesus, knowing how our brains work, Jesus wants to convey some kind of very powerful, very important truth. So how does Jesus do it? With pictures. Because if Jesus had sat down and said, let's exegete, let's go through and look at all the grammatical structures and the verb tenses of these ancient Hebrew documents. Let's sit down. How many people would remember that? Nobody. They would all be asleep 10 minutes in. But what they do remember is all of the pictures that Jesus said. They remember the person in the field, one being left and one being taken. They remember the fig tree withering. They remember the Gehenna, the hell of fire. That's a pretty powerful picture. And that's what we remember. If we're honest with ourselves, we tend to remember pictures. From the very beginning, when I started actually paying attention to things that were said in sermons, although at the time they were called homilies, where I was, the thing that you remember are the pictures. Because that's kind of how our brains work. Right? We are much better at remembering pictures. Have you ever met somebody and they're like, I'm so good with faces, but I never remember names? That's like everybody. Right? Very few people are good at remembering names and faces, because the face is a picture and the name is letters. I can remember your face, but I can't always remember your letters. And so Jesus, knowing that many of the people who would be hearing what he said were illiterate, uses lots of pictures. He's brilliant. He's a genius. He's the greatest teacher ever, because he knew exactly how to communicate with his audience. We're out of time. We've got 1 minute left, which is really not enough time to answer most questions. So we'll go ahead and pray, and then we'll be done. Our great God, we are so thankful that someone like you has taken the time and the care to think of people like us. Your great love for us is awe-inspiring, and it is encouraging, and it helps us to love you in return and to love other people. It drives us forward in a want to be closer to you and to be with you. We're so thankful that you have shown yourself to us and taught us in ways that we can see and understand, in ways that help us to be more like you. We thank you, Father, for all the wonderful blessings you've given to us. We thank you for each other, for the fellowship we have through your Son, Jesus. It's in his name that we humbly pray. Amen. Thank you very much for your questions and comments.
Probably do it today. Don, you doing all right? Good. How you doing today? Good to see you. Yeah, I get it. Good to see you too.
You're gonna smell like lotion now. You're gonna smell good. I got lotion on my hands. Now you got it. Spread the love. Is it okay?
I got your message this morning. My phone was on silent yesterday. No, my phone was on the top of the piano at home. It was on silent. And this morning I woke up and was like, nobody called me yesterday. You did.
What happens on my face was... It's still recording. I wonder if Dad knows that. He stops us. It's going to be on the video, you know.